My name's Kendra Ross. I'm 26 years old. I work night shifts at the ER. And according to my own mother, I'm a leech. She didn't blurt it out during a fight or mutter it behind my back. No, she said it loud and clear, standing right at the head of our Thanksgiving table. One hand gripping the carving knife, the other holding a wine glass like it was part of a ceremony. To Kendra, she said, looking straight at me. Our little leech. November's your last month under this roof. Time to finally grow up. The room went dead silent. So quiet. I could actually hear the furnace humming from the basement. My sister stared down at her plate like it might save her. My stepdad made a show of clearing his throat and pretended to slice more turkey. No one wanted seconds. One of the kids at the table asked what a leech was, and an adult chuckled like it was just a harmless joke. No one said, "Hey, that's too much." No one pointed out that I paid for half the food on the table. They just sat there, all of them, waiting to see if I'd blow up, burst into tears, or start begging to stay. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I cut off a piece of turkey, forced it down past the knot in my throat, and said the only thing I knew I could say without cracking. "Pass the gravy." Outside I played along, smiling through fake conversation and letting the night crawl to a close. But inside, something shifted. Something locked into place. If they truly saw me as nothing more than a leech, then losing me shouldn't be a big deal, right? So while that house slept, I was already making my move. I knew exactly what I was going to pack. I knew which bills I'd cancel. I planned every step of how I'd walk out without leaving so much as a note behind. What I didn't see coming was who'd show up at my new place the very next day, acting like nothing had happened. If you've ever felt like a burden in your own family, stick with me. You'll want to hear how this ends. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss what came after I walked out of that house. The next morning felt strange. My head was clear, sharper than my emotions. Like my mind had already made peace with something my heart was just now figuring out. That clarity helped me trace it all back. Every step that led to that Thanksgiving table. It hadn't blown up in a single night. It built up over time, quietly, like cold seeping through old walls in a Rochester winter. Slow at first, until suddenly it's everywhere. I'd moved back in with my mom over a year earlier, after she had a health scare. Nothing major, but just enough to make me feel like I couldn't ignore it. Giving up my apartment and crashing at her place felt temporary. Practical decision. I worked nights in the ER, barely saw sunlight, and saving on rent seemed like the first smart choice I'd made in a while. For a while, I convinced myself I was okay being the reliable daughter again. Her husband, my stepdad Victor Ross, didn't say much when I brought my boxes in. He never argued unless it somehow benefited him. To him, I was just another household convenience. Quiet, helpful, always there. At first, I didn't notice the pattern, but eventually I saw it. Anytime something broke, or a bill came in, he'd just wait, like it was automatic that I'd handle it. Like flipping a switch. The man could vanish faster than smoke whenever real responsibility showed up. Then there was my sister Cynthia Hale. She was the blueprint for what my mom thought a daughter should be. Married. A mom. A tidy little life, at least on paper. Reality was way messier, but it didn't matter. Cynthia never hesitated to lean on me. Need a babysitter? She'd call me. Forgot something on the calendar? I'd fill in. I kept telling myself I didn't mind, that I was being helpful. But the truth? I just didn't want to disappoint anyone. I'd spent years trying to become someone they could accept, even if it meant losing sight of who I really was. At some point, my presence stopped being a favor and turned into an expectation. That expectation slowly morphed into full-on dependence. And in that house, dependence always came with silence. There were no thank yous, no acknowledgments. Not even a casual nod in my direction. Whenever something worked in that house, it was because I made it work. The internet? That was my account. Gas bill? My name. Electricity, water, even the streaming subscriptions? All charged to my card. Every single month. And every month I told myself it was fine. That I could handle it. That this was just what families did, look out for each other. But somewhere deep down, I knew I was carrying way more than anyone wanted to admit. What messed with me the most was how completely invisible it all seemed to them. If the fridge was stocked, they acted like it had always been that way. If the heat kicked on during one of those brutal Rochester winters, they didn't stop to think about how it got there. If the Wi-Fi connected instantly, nobody realized it came from the same paycheck that paid for my hospital scrubs, my part of the rent, and the weight of my student loans. To them, I was just the daughter who'd come back home, not the one quietly keeping it all running. Even my mom, Lorraine, leaned on my presence to keep up appearances. She liked it to look like she still had everything under control. Like her grown daughter had moved back in out of love, not obligation. Anytime I tried to talk to her about boundaries, or the stress I was feeling, she treated it like I was being dramatic, ungrateful even, as if sleeping in a room down the hall erased all the ways I'd been propping up her version of stability. The imbalance wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It just lived in the places where gratitude should have been. Every time they brushed something off, every time they reminded me I was still figuring things out, pushed me further away. And the more I stepped up, the less anyone noticed. By the time the holidays rolled around, it didn't feel like a phase. It felt like my permanent role. Lorraine had mastered her quiet digs. Cynthia was always the one who had it together. And me? I was the one who hadn't settled down. Victor just assumed I'd take care of anything he forgot. Cynthia assumed I had unlimited energy and time. And me? I assumed none of them would ever understand the cost of the part one played. The damage was already there. Thanksgiving didn't cause the crack. It just made it impossible to ignore. I had spent so long trying to justify their expectations, I didn't even realize how much of myself I'd lost trying to meet them. The more I kept the house together, the more invisible I became inside it. Looking back now, I can see all the signs. The bone-deep exhaustion after a double shift. The tension in my jaw every time my phone lit up with another favor. The hollow feeling when I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone asked how I was doing, without needing something from me. I told myself this was what loyalty looked like. But loyalty without recognition? That's not loyalty. That's erosion. Quiet. Constant. Destructive. And by the time November came in, heavy with early nights and gray skies, that erosion had already carved out everything I had left to give. Morning came before I was ready. Not a soft, gentle kind of morning, but the kind that shows up whether you're prepared or not. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the stillness settle into my chest. I didn't have a checklist, no master plan on a whiteboard, but something in me moved with calm purpose. Like I'd already rehearsed this moment over and over in my head. I didn't need to be angry, I just needed to be sure. First thing I did, I grabbed my laptop and opened the browser. My fingers moved automatically, years of muscle memory from logging into all the household accounts. I clicked into the internet bill first. That one had always been mine. I'd never missed a payment. I sat there for a second staring at the account page, not out of nostalgia, but because it hit me just how much weight I'd been carrying, without anyone ever calling it weight. Then I clicked the button. Service cancellation confirmed. A second later, the email came through. Done. It didn't feel dramatic or angry, just clean. Like drawing a line with a steady hand. Not revenge. Just clarity. Next up, the utilities. Gas, electric, water, each one under my name, each one silently draining from my account for months. I'd been covering a full household that wasn't even mine, and somehow never stopped to question how absurd that really was. Disabling autopay felt like finally setting something heavy down. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I was taking something back that I never should have given away so freely. Then came the subscriptions, streaming apps, cloud backups, random monthly charges I barely noticed but had quietly supported the whole house. I changed the passwords one by one, steady and calm, kind of amazed by how much of their digital lives I'd built and maintained. No one had ever asked how the Wi-Fi stayed fast or how shows always worked or why nothing ever glitched. They just assumed it all came with the walls. When I'd shut down the last account, I turned to the room itself. Packing didn't take long. I didn't own much. A side effect of working nights and not having time or space for hobbies. Also a result of never really feeling like the room was mine to fill. A few sets of clothes. My ER scrubs. A handful of books. A shoebox of old letters. A folder of financial paperwork. It all fit into 2 carry-ons and an old duffel from college. I didn't linger over anything. Didn't try to attach meaning to objects that had long stopped meaning anything. There was no need to make the moment heavier than it already was. The house stayed quiet around me. No footsteps. No hallway creaks. No movement from the kitchen. It hit me then how much of myself I'd spent trying not to disturb anyone. Always tiptoeing, always adjusting. But that instinct didn't serve me anymore. I walked the hall with my bags, and I didn't glance back at the room I'd slept in for so many nights. It had never felt like home. Just a temporary stop in a place that needed what I could give, not who I was. I set my keys on the kitchen counter. Not gently. Not with any kind of dramatic flair. Just placed them there, simple and clear. So when the heat shut off or the Wi-Fi died, no one could pretend they didn't know why. The keys made a soft clink against the counter. A quiet period at the end of a sentence no one ever spoke out loud. Walking out didn't feel how I imagined it might. I thought there'd be tension or second-guessing or that familiar edge of guilt. But the air outside was cold and crisp, and the weight I expected to feel never came. It wasn't a grand escape. It wasn't rebellion. It was just the next step in a truth I had finally stopped running from. I couldn't keep living in a space that saw me as a fixture instead of a person. I tossed my bags into the back seat. The engine started up without a hiccup, the steady hum of it grounding me more than I expected. Rochester's streets were quiet. Usually that silence made me feel small. But today it felt wide. Like breathing room. Room to exist without trying to prove myself to anyone. As I pulled away, I didn't check the mirror. I didn't need a final look. There was nothing back there I needed to carry forward. Only the road ahead mattered now. Uncertain, unpolished, mine. And for the first time in a long time, that kind of uncertainty didn't scare me. When I reached the small apartment I'd lined up earlier that week, I hauled my bags up one at a time. The stairwell smelled like dust and chipped paint, but there was something honest about it. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set my things down on the scuffed wooden floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every crack in the wall, every scuff on the floor, every inch of that space was mine, and only mine. I didn't need to label the moment or turn it into some grand declaration. Just standing there, in that quiet apartment, letting myself exist without holding up anyone else's world. That was enough. Evening crept in gently, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be noticed, just settles in until it becomes part of the atmosphere. As I stood there taking in the stillness, I realized how unfamiliar it all felt. Not in a bad way. Just new. Like discovering a kind of space I hadn't realized I'd been missing. No footsteps thumping overhead. No cabinets slamming. No voices floating through the hallway. Just the low, uneven hum of the radiator trying to keep up with another cold Rochester night. I sat down on the floor, leaned my back against the wall, and let the emptiness surround me. The place wasn't impressive. The paint was chipped, and the floor tilted slightly near the door. But it grounded me in a way that made all the noise I'd left behind feel far away. It was simple, but that simplicity felt earned. For once, I wasn't shrinking myself to stay out of the way. I didn't have to calculate my volume or tiptoe through someone else's comfort zone. This was the first space in years where every single corner belonged to me. A little after sunset, my phone buzzed for the first time. The sound felt jarring, too sharp for the quiet that had settled in. I didn't reach for it. I just watched the screen light up next to my bag. A message preview popped up. I recognized the name immediately. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. If anything, it confirmed what I'd been circling all day. The moment I walked out of that house, something shifted. A balance they never realized existed until it tipped. The message was short, dry. Just a casual question about the Wi-Fi, like I was the IT department and not the person who had just uprooted her entire life. They treated everything I did like some automatic setting. No thought about where it came from, no pause to consider what it cost. The words were light, but the expectation they carried? That hit heavier than anything. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. The preview said it all. Come back. Play the role. Pretend none of this mattered. Another message followed soon after. Longer this time. A little more frazzled. Still no apology. Still no recognition. Something about a movie not loading. A child upset. A subtle plea masked as inconvenience. Even with me gone, they expected my patience to stretch across the distance. To keep patching their holes even when I'd stopped living in their house. I placed the phone face down on the floor. And in the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp I'd brought from the old place. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The plaster up there wasn't smooth. It had ridges and texture that caught the lamp's glow, casting shadows that shifted with every small flicker. Somehow those imperfections made me feel at ease. Like maybe things didn't have to be flawless to feel right. I wasn't chasing perfection. I just wanted a place where I didn't have to defend my own presence. The air was cold, but it didn't feel hostile. The radiator clanged now and then, doing its best to warm the space. Back at my mom's house, heat flowed like magic. But only because I made sure the bills were paid and the systems were running. Here, the warmth felt like a shared effort, me and the building figuring it out together. It made me appreciate every little bit of comfort. I pulled on an old sweatshirt, wrapped myself up, and listened to the pipes groan and settle. The night deepened. Streetlights painted faint stripes across the floor. And I let myself breathe in that still, imperfect, quiet space. I hadn't realized just how drained I was until my breathing slowed and the tension in my shoulders finally let go. The absence of constant demands felt almost dizzying. No one calling my name from down the hall. No one asking for help. No passive-aggressive hints that I wasn't pulling my weight. Even my own thoughts felt quieter, no longer drowned out by the pressure to constantly predict someone else's needs. I closed my eyes, letting the silence wrap around me. Then another buzz. Softer this time. Almost hesitant. I didn't touch the phone. I let it fade out on its own, letting the stillness return. Choosing not to respond didn't come from anger. Came from necessity. It was me drawing a line I should have drawn a long time ago. That world behind the messages? It didn't define me anymore. And I didn't owe it another ounce of my energy. Eventually, I stood and took in the apartment again. The bare walls. The open floor. Just the glow of one small lamp. None of it looked like loss. It looked like a blank page. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how long it would take to adjust, or when this place would finally feel like home. But right then, the uncertainty didn't scare me. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was a pause. A rare, wide-open moment where I could finally hear myself think. For the first time in what felt like forever, the night was mine. Morning rolled in with a pale haze through the windows, softening everything in sight. But the calm in the room didn't match the tightness starting to build in my chest. I had just finished stacking a few essentials when a knock cut through the hallway, loud, firm, deliberate. It wasn't a delivery. It wasn't a neighbor. And it definitely wasn't a mistake. That knock carried weight. And I recognized it immediately. When I opened the door, Victor Ross stood there. And just from the look on his face, I knew exactly why he'd come. He looked out of place, standing in the frame of my worn-down apartment, like someone dragged out of a script he understood and dropped into a scene that made no sense to him. His expression wasn't about concern. It was about disruption. Something in his neatly ordered world had gone off track, and he was here to fix it. He walked in without waiting, eyes scanning the room as if measuring how far I'd fallen from whatever life he thought I should be living. I could feel the judgment in his glance at the empty shelves and undecorated walls. But what hit harder was the irritation underneath it. Not worry. Not confusion. Just pure annoyance. As if me leaving had inconvenienced him more than it had affected the household. He didn't need to say a word. I already knew. That look on his face. I'd seen it before. Every time something broke. Every time the Wi-Fi lagged. Every time a payment slipped his mind because he assumed someone else had it handled. That someone had always been me. Now, standing here in my space, watching him shift uncomfortably, I felt the full weight of what I'd carried. None of them had ever been responsible for the systems that made their lives run smoothly. They just expected things to work. And when I stepped out, the whole thing cracked. I wasn't shocked by that, but the speed at which it all unraveled, that gave me a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. As he stood in the middle of my apartment, I let my mind roll through the list. The electric bill, the gas line, the Wi-Fi, the streaming logins, all the little comforts they never gave a second thought to. Invisible threads I'd held together for them, until I let go. Now those threads were snapping one by one. And only now did they feel the loss. The silence between us said everything, thick with the things he wouldn't say, and full of truths I had known for a long, long time, but had finally stopped ignoring. If this had happened just weeks earlier, seeing Victor at my door might have shaken me. But now all it did was make things clearer. Something clicked into place, sharp and solid. I saw the roles for what they really were. His frustration wasn't about me. It wasn't concern. It was the panic of someone realizing they now had to take responsibility for tasks they'd ignored for years. Tasks he'd never bothered to understand, didn't want, and frankly couldn't handle. Blaming me had always been easy when I was still part of the machine keeping everything running. But now, I was out, and he had no one left to shift the weight onto. The way he looked at me, it was like he expected something, an explanation, maybe an apology, some way to make his showing up here feel worth it. But I didn't have anything to give him. The distance between us hadn't started that morning. It had grown slowly over time, every time he brushed off the work I did, every time he acted like my effort didn't count. Now he stood there, inches away, staring at someone he barely recognized, because the version of me he wanted access to didn't exist anymore. I couldn't help thinking back to all the nights I came home from a brutal ER shift, only to pay bills or fix something that had broken. All the times I stepped in before they even noticed there was a problem. The weariness I carried like a second skin. The silence that always swallowed any thanks I might have hoped for. I wasn't a person to them. I was a source, a function, a fix-it button they didn't even know they were pressing. Having Victor in this apartment, this space I had built for myself, brought it all into focus. He wasn't here because he was worried. He was here because the system had failed without me. There was something brutally honest about that realization. Painful, yes, but also freeing. I didn't owe him an explanation. Not when he'd never once tried to see me beyond what I could provide. I didn't owe comfort to a household that only noticed me when something needed fixing. He stood there waiting, expecting me to patch it all back together. But for the first time, the silence felt like strength. It filled the room with a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't explain. Didn't offer him anything. I just let the truth settle around us. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was a boundary, firm, unmistakable, and long overdue. I didn't move closer. Didn't open the door wider. Didn't soften the edge of the moment. All I allowed myself to feel was the quiet confidence that I had finally walked away from a role I never should have been cast in. After he left, the apartment returned to its calm. And that stillness, it felt like a presence all on its own. Like the space itself was reminding me, this is yours now. I moved slowly, adjusting a stack of blankets, repositioning a lamp near the corner, running my fingers across surfaces that now belonged to me. The quiet didn't feel empty. Felt like structure. Like a boundary holding strong. The air had this strange brightness to it, like the walls themselves had finally exhaled, letting go of weight I hadn't even known I'd been carrying. I didn't expect the house I left to start falling apart so fast. But my phone made it clear it had. The alerts started stacking up. Each buzz like a tiny knock on the door, asking for re-entry. I didn't rush to check them. I didn't need to. The sound alone told me enough. Someone back home had run into another issue they didn't know how to fix. When I finally glanced at the screen, the pattern was obvious. Missed calls. Message previews lined up one after another. Timestamps crawling forward into the morning. There was no anger in them. Not the sharp, blaming kind I'd braced for. Instead, there was a different tone. Disoriented. Scattered. Almost panicked in a quiet, unfamiliar way. It was the kind of panic that sets in when the foundation you've always trusted just disappears. The tone I recognized best wasn't concern. It was desperation dressed up to sound like care. As I sat there, the memories rolled in. Years of stepping in without question. Years of taking on responsibilities before anyone even realized they existed. All those nights I came home from the ER completely drained, and still found enough energy to notice what no one else did. A bill left unpaid on the counter. A blinking router light. A thermostat off by just enough to matter. I picked up every loose thread instinctively, because the house didn't run unless someone held it together. And that someone had always been me. Now, watching those messages stack up on my screen, I saw it clearly. How deeply they had relied on the system I had built in the background. The appearance of stability wasn't thanks to some strong family bond. It was built on me, on my habit of quietly fixing what others ignored. And the second I stepped away, those cracks stopped being invisible. They turned into holes no one could step around anymore. The next batch of notifications felt softer, less certain. Like even the people sending them weren't sure they still had space in my life. I recognized the names. Each one came with its own flavor of unease. Excuses wrapped around subtle pleas. Not outright apologies, just suggestions that maybe I should come back. That it would make things easier for them. There was this unspoken idea threaded through the messages. That my distance wasn't a statement, but an inconvenience. That it would be reasonable for me to return because they were struggling, not because they understood why I left. And that's when it hit me. With a quiet, steady weight I couldn't ignore anymore. They weren't reaching out to reconnect. They were reaching out because they didn't know how to function without what I used to provide. It wasn't about me, It was about them, and what I used to make easier. And for too long I blurred the difference. Now seeing it clearly, something inside me clicked into place. Solid. Unmovable. The room felt steadier, like it was echoing the shift in my thoughts. I wasn't responsible for what they were dealing with now. Not the unpaid bills. Not the broken systems. Not the unease that followed the absence of someone they took for granted. I wasn't the solution anymore. And I never should have been the one patching over the cracks they refused to see. What they were feeling wasn't grief. It was the sting of losing convenience. And the more messages I read, the more I felt a distance growing inside me. But this time it didn't hurt. It didn't make me anxious. I didn't feel the pull to fix anything. That urge to smooth things over, to make it all okay, was gone. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you finally step outside the system that once defined you, and realize just how small that system really was. I knew more messages would come. Maybe they'd grow more urgent. Maybe they'd turn emotional or angry. But none of them had the power to undo the line I'd drawn. The phone buzzed again, vibrating across the counter with its steady rhythm. I didn't check it. Didn't need to. I already knew what it said. Things were falling apart. Roles were breaking down. And the silence I held was louder than anything I could have said out loud. I turned away from the phone, walked to the window and opened it. Let the cold air in. It hit my skin like a small jolt, sharp and clean. A reminder of why I left. A reminder that not every call deserves an answer. Not every plea is mine to carry. And not every problem belongs to me just because I know how to solve it. The messages kept coming. But the space between us had already settled. Firm. Final. Unshakable. For the first time, the weight wasn't mine to hold. And the consequences, they were finally landing exactly where they were supposed to. Time kept moving, even after everything fell apart. I went to work. Came home to my little apartment. Paid my own bills. Built routines that belonged only to me. The house in Rochester, the place I once called home, became just another address. No longer the center of my life. Just somewhere the fallout still arrived by mail. Envelopes started showing up in my mailbox, each one with my name printed across the front: gas, electric, services I'd set up for a household I no longer lived in. One letter came from the property management company for my mother's rental. Apparently, the utilities getting shut off had triggered issues with the lease. And right there in the middle of the page, my name sat as the primary account holder. I had left that house, but on paper I was still tangled up in it. If I wanted a future that was truly mine, I had to untie every knot. That's when my Aunt Nain stepped in. She'd always kept a bit of distance from the family drama, quietly watching, saying less than she knew. But now, she was the first one who reached out without asking for anything in return. No guilt. No questions. Just help. When she showed up at my apartment, she came with a folder full of paperwork, copies, notes, account numbers. She had already spoken to the landlord, contacted the utility companies. At my little kitchen table, she spread everything out in front of me and calmly walked me through what needed to happen so I could walk away clean. No debt, no damage trailing behind me. For the first time, someone treated what had happened to me as unfair, not as inconvenient. Signing those forms felt heavier than I expected. Every signature untied another thread. I wasn't erasing what I'd done. I was ending the unspoken rule that I'd always keep doing it. News about the old house reached me in bits and pieces. Nain mentioned that the landlord wouldn't renew the lease unless they paid a higher deposit, thanks to the utility mess. My mom and Victor ended up moving into a smaller place, something they could actually afford without my name propping it up. Cynthia had to pick up extra shifts and figure out childcare that didn't include me. Their lives adjusted, not because they wanted to, but because they finally had to. It didn't feel like payback. It felt like the world catching up to the truth. Meanwhile, my life settled into something simple and real. I worked extra shifts when I wanted to save, not because I was terrified of another surprise bill. I bought little things that made the apartment feel like home, stocked the pantry with food I actually liked, paid my own utilities, not for someone else's comfort but for mine. I knew exactly what I used and exactly what I owed. No one else's needs hid behind my name. Now and then, my phone still lit up with messages from my mother. Some tried to smooth over the past, soft words meant to rewrite what was said at that table. Others leaned on guilt and nostalgia, as if that history gave them permanent access to my time. I read them less and replied even less than that. Distance didn't erase the years behind us, but it finally put a limit on what those years were allowed to ask of me. That word, leech, lingered in my head for a while. Sharp, ugly. But the longer I lived in a space I chose, making decisions for myself, the more that word fell apart. It didn't match the truth. It matched the story they told themselves to justify using me. One night I sat at my little table, eating a simple dinner, going over some notes from work, and it hit me all at once. This was never just about the heat or the Wi-Fi or whose name was on the account. It was about value, about who gets to define it while standing on top of your effort. It was about how fast people call you selfish the moment you stop letting them take whatever they want. If there's any lesson in this, it's this. Being needed is not the same as being respected. Carrying your family doesn't mean you owe them your silence, or your future, or your health. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do, the most protective thing you can do, is to get up from the table where you're served blame instead of gratitude, and walk away without saying sorry. I didn't create their hardship. I didn't sabotage their lives. I just stepped out of the role where I'd been catching all the fallout. The house adjusted to my absence because it had to, and I adjusted to my freedom because I finally chose to. They learned what life looked like without the person they once dared to call a leech.